So let me just start from the beginning, and I'm going to say that it might actually be helpful to you if you've read this poem before, if you have some familiarity with the poem. Close reading is all about reading and rereading. And so if you already have some familiarity with the poem, if you've given it a go, you've tried to make sense of it, that'll make this video perhaps even more helpful to you. So this is a servant to servants. I didn't make you know how glad I was to have you come and camp here on our land. Those are the first two lines. And what we want to do when we're approaching poems like these, we want to try and get a sense of the dramatic situation. We want to get a sense of who the speaker is, who the addressee is, who the speaker's talking to, and why, right? What is it that prompts this speech? We don't get too much to go off of from these first two lines, but what we understand is that the speaker's talking to a camper or some campers on their land. The speaker seems to be the proprietor of the land, or perhaps a more permanent resident on this land, right? We have to read a little bit further to get more of a sense of who this speaker is and what this speaker is like. I promised myself to get down someday and see the way you lived, but I don't know. With a household of hungry men to feed, I guess you'd find. It seems to me I can't express my feelings any more than I can raise my voice or want to lift my hand. Oh, I can lift it when I have to. So we learn that the speaker feeds a household of hungry men. The speaker, part of the speaker's work is cooking and feeding these men. We also learn a little bit about the speaker's emotional condition, right? The speaker has some difficulty in expressing feelings for whatever reason. What is it that's going on inside of the speaker? We don't know exactly, not just yet, but we read, "Did ever you feel so? I hope you never." And that's sort of a desperate sentiment, right? Whatever it is that the speaker's feeling, the speaker doesn't wish it upon anybody else. The speaker doesn't wish it upon these campers. It's got so I don't even know for sure whether I am glad, sorry, or anything. There's nothing but a voice like left inside that seems to tell me how I ought to feel and would feel if I wasn't all gone wrong. The speaker feels as if there is something that's gone wrong within the speaker's self. You take the lake, and now the speaker's drawing the attention of the addressee, the campers here, to the land around them, the landscape. You take the lake, I look and look at it, I see it's a fair, pretty sheet of water. I stand and make myself repeat out loud the advantages it has, so long and narrow, like a deep piece of some old running river cut short off at both ends. So the speaker's admiring or trying to admire the landscape, right? The speaker knows, kind of from a cerebral point of view, that this landscape is worth admiring and worth appreciating, but can't muster up whatever it is that the speaker needs in order to feel this appreciation. It lies 5 miles straight away through the mountain notch from the sink window where I wash the plates, and all our storms come up toward the house, drawing the slow waves wider and wider and wider. You can see the speaker standing at the window washing these plates, and again, attempting to appreciate and to sort of soak it all in. But there's something that's preventing all of that. It took my mind off donuts and soda biscuit to step outdoors and take the water dazzle a sunny morning, or take the rising wind about my face and body and through my wrapper. When a storm threatened from the dragon's den and a cold chill shivered across the lake. I see it's a fair, pretty sheet of water. The speaker repeats this line. Our Willoughby, How did you hear of it? I expect, though, everyone's heard of it. In a book about ferns, listen to that. We have this conversation going on between the speaker and these campers. The speaker asking, where did you hear about our lake? You heard about it in this book about ferns? That's kind of weird, right? You let things more like feathers regulate your coming and going. These campers are seemingly free spirits. They just go wherever they like. They hear about a lake in a book about ferns, and they decide just to go out and camp there. And you like it here? I can see how you might, but I don't know. It would be different if more people came, for then there would be business. As it is, the cottages Len built, sometimes we rent them, sometimes we don't. We've got a good piece of shore that ought to be worth something, and may yet. Len, this is the first name, the first personal name that we've come across, and it seems that Len and the speaker have an intimate relation. They're perhaps spouses, they're perhaps husband and wife. We suspect that the speaker is a woman. She talks about her wrapper, and we get further indications and indeed further confirmation later that this is indeed a woman who's speaking to these campers, that she's married to Len. But I don't count on it as much as Len. He looks on the bright side of everything, including me. He thinks I'll be all right with doctoring. So Len sort of has the responsibility of taking care of the speaker, and he thinks that she needs doctoring, she needs medicine. They've been to doctors, it seems. They've been to several doctors, and they all have the opinion that, yes, she needs doctoring, she needs medicine. Only one doctor has a dissenting opinion, right? But it's not medicine. Lowe's the only doctor dared say so. It's rest I want. There, I've set it out, from cooking meals for hungry hired men and washing dishes after them, from doing things over and over that just won't stay done. So it's her opinion, it's the speaker's opinion, as well as this one doctor's opinion, that really doctoring and medicine aren't going to help her. Really, what she needs is rest. Rest from cooking meals for hungry hired men and washing dishes after them. These are these menial tasks, this labor that she has to do, and we can easily imagine how doing this every day and over would get to you, right? Would harm your mental condition. But the next line seems to indicate also something perhaps a little bit more metaphysical. From doing things over and over that just won't stay done. And this seems to be more about the condition of life. It's about the futility of everything that we do, right? Everything that we experience. Repetition. By good rights, I ought not to have so much put on me. There's a lot on the speaker. Burdens, weight. We don't know what else might be weighing on the speaker's mind, but there's a lot, right? But there seems no other way. Len says one steady pull more ought to do it. So Len, ever the optimist, he thinks we've just got to tough it out. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Just bear through it. The speaker agrees, she says, but only to a certain extent, or only in a kind of mitigated manner. She says, and I agree to that. Or rather, he says the best way out is always through, and I agree to that, or insofar as that I can see no way out but through. She agrees with what Len is saying, not because she's an optimist, not because she can see some light at the end of the tunnel, but because she's resigned to this condition. There is no other way, there is no other road. This is what I have to endure, it seems the speaker's saying. I can see no way out but through, leastways for me, and then they'll be convinced. And that's sort of an ominous line there. What will they be convinced of? That she was right about herself, that she was right about her condition, that doctoring and medicine would do no good for her, perhaps. It's not that Len don't want the best for me. It was his plan our moving over in beside the lake from where that day I showed you we used to live, 10 miles from anywhere. We didn't change without some sacrifice, but Len went at it to make up the loss. So Len is not entirely uncaring, right? He seems to want to do what's right, what's best for his wife, for the speaker. But he doesn't seem to pay enough attention to what the speaker herself is saying about her condition, right? He's just trying to work through whatever it is that's going on. His work's a man's, of course, from sun to sun, but he works when he works as hard as I do. Though there's small profit in comparisons, women and men will make them all the same. And here the speaker is remarking upon that gender binary. She's a woman and Len's a man. Men do their kind of work, women do their kind of work. And there's small profit in comparisons, right? So we have by now a very good sense of the dramatic situation in this poem. The speaker is a woman living beside a lake, living with her husband Len who's in all sorts of business. The speaker seems to have some history of illness. We don't know exactly what kind of illness, but they've sought help from doctors. She thinks that doctoring and medicine won't help her. She's telling all of this to some campers on their land, right? That's the dramatic situation, and having a good understanding of that really will help us to unpack the rest of the poem and the entirety of the poem. But work ain't all. Len undertakes too much. He's into everything in town. This year it's highways, and he's got too many men around him to look after that make waste. They take advantage of him shamefully, and proud too of themselves for doing so. We get some further characterization of Len. He's an optimist, he's busy, people take advantage of him. We have 4 here to board, great good-for-nothings, sprawling about the kitchen with their talk while I fry their bacon, much they care. These 4 boarders don't seem to be very good people, they don't seem to be very respectful. No more put out in what they do or say. They're sprawling about the kitchen with their talk while I fry their bacon. Much they care. No more put out in what they do or say than if I wasn't in the room at all. Coming and going all the time they are. I don't learn what their names are, let alone their characters, or whether they're safe to have inside the house with doors unlocked. So there's no sort of background checks here. The speaker doesn't know anything about them, and maybe they're bad people. Maybe she should be more wary, she says. I'm not afraid of them, though. If they're not afraid of me, there's 2 can play at that. So the speaker says quite courageously, I'm not afraid of them. Perhaps they should be the ones who are afraid of me. Now, why might they be afraid of her? I have my fancies. It runs in the family. My father's brother wasn't right. They kept him locked up for years back there at the old farm. So the speaker now is talking more specifically about her condition and about her family's history, right? The history of mental illness in her family. I've been away once. Yes, I've been away. The state asylum. So the speaker tells these campers, I've been at the asylum. I've been institutionalized. I've been committed, right? And in these next few lines, she relates to us her thoughts, her feelings about this period in her life. I was prejudiced. I wouldn't have sent anyone of mine there. You know the old idea. The only asylum was the poorhouse and those who could afford, rather than send their folks to such a place kept them at home, and it does seem more human. The speaker here is not suggesting that it is more human to keep a family member like this at home. She's parroting the prevailing opinion, or perhaps the old-fashioned opinion, that you really should keep someone like this at home and not send them to the asylum. But she contradicts this notion, right? She expresses it, she relates it in order to contradict it. She says, but it's not so. The place is the asylum. There they have every means proper to do with, and you aren't darkening other people's lives. So the asylum is the place where you have the experts, you have the expertise, you have the equipment, you have everything that you need in order to help the people who are committed there, right? Moreover, it's not just better for the patients, the speaker says, and you aren't darkening other people's lives. Worse than no good to them, and they no good to you in your condition. You can't know affection or the want of it in that state. And here the speaker is relating her own personal experience, right? I couldn't have known affection. I couldn't have known the lack of affection, the want of affection in that state. So affection would have been no good to me, right? Really, I was better at the asylum. I've heard too much of the old-fashioned way, she says. My father's brother, he went mad quite young. And we have to wonder here, this is the second time that the speaker has referred to her relation as her father's brother. Usually we refer to this relation as uncle, right? But she says father's brother. And we wonder why it is that she calls her uncle this. And I think we do get the answer a bit later on, but I'm just flagging this now so that we can come back to it later. Some thought he'd been bitten by a dog because his violence took on the form of carrying his pillow in his teeth, but it's more likely he was crossed in love, or so the story goes. The speaker has been told this story, so she hasn't seen it firsthand, but she has heard the details of this story, and she has her own opinions about it. It was some girl. Anyway, all he talked about was love. They soon saw he would do someone a mischief if he weren't kept strict watch of, and it ended in father's building him a sort of cage, or room within a room, of hickory poles, like stanchions in a barn, from floor to ceiling, a narrow passage all the way around. So her father built her uncle this cage, this prison, a beast's stall, as she calls it, in order to keep him confined. Anything they put in for furniture he'd tear to pieces, even a bed to lie on, so they made the place comfortable with straw, like a beast's stall, to ease their consciences. So they're doing this, the family's doing this for their own sake, right, in order to ease their conscience, in order to feel better about themselves. Of course, they had to feed him without dishes. They tried to keep him clothed, but he paraded with his clothes on his arm, all of his clothes. Cruel, it sounds. Yes, absolutely, it sounds astonishingly cruel. I suppose they did the best they knew. So that was their excuse, right? That this was the best they knew. They were prejudiced, like the speaker was, against the asylum. They thought, that's the poorhouse. We should keep our relation close to home. But again, the speaker is relating this opinion, either this prevailing opinion or this old-fashioned idea, as she calls it, this notion, in order to contradict it, in order to say, no, what you think is humane is actually inhumane. And I reiterate this, I emphasize this because I want to point out that we can get all of this, we can understand all of this just from reading the text, right? We don't really need to know all that much about early 20th century ideas, the prevailing notions about mental illness and mental institutions. We don't need to know the history of regional hospitals in Boston in order to arrive at this conclusion. We know it from reading the text. We know it from reading closely as we have. I suppose they did the best they knew, and just when he was at the height of his illness, father and mother married, and mother came a bride to help take care of such a creature and accommodate her young life to his. So now we know why it is that the speaker refers to her uncle as her father's brother, right? It's not her mother's brother. It's her father's brother. And when her mother married her father, she moved in with her father and took care of her father's brother, right? The speaker's mother's brother-in-law. And that was what marrying father meant to her. She had to lie and hear love things made dreadful by his shouts in the night. He'd shout and shout until the strength was shouted out of him and his voice died down slowly from exhaustion. From this picture, we have to wonder, what effect did this have on the speaker's mother? Undoubtedly, it had some significant impact on the mother, right? And we wonder whether the speaker was conceived during this period. We wonder about the hereditary effects of mental illness. The speaker is, genetically linked to her father's brother, but there's also this intergenerational impact that this illness has on the family, first on the speaker's mother and then on the speaker herself. He'd pull his bars apart like bow and bowstring and let them go and make them twang until his hands had worn them smooth as any ox bow. This is very detailed. It's graphic. We can hear these sounds as the speaker's relating them to these campers and to us. It's graphic, but where does the speaker get this imagery from, if not from her mother, right? She didn't see this firsthand. Somebody told her this story, and it seems that she knows this story from the perspective of her mother, right? And no wonder, of course, this was significant to her mother, and thus it's been passed down, perhaps in more ways than one, to the speaker herself. The only fun he had, I've heard them say though, they found a way to put a stop to it. It's a very ominous line again, and we don't know how the speaker's family put a stop to it. We don't know what measures they took. The speaker doesn't know, right? So we're in the dark as much as she is. He was before my time. I never saw him, but the pen stayed exactly as it was there in the upper chamber in the L, a sort of catch-all full of attic clutter. It's a relic, it's a reminder, a constant reminder of what was a part of the family's history. I often think of the smooth hickory bars. It got so I would say, half fooling, it's time I took my turn upstairs in jail. Just as you will till it becomes a habit. No wonder I was glad to get away. Of course you would be glad to get away from this place and from these memories, from these reminders. Mind you, I waited till Len said the word. I didn't want the blame if things went wrong. I was glad, though, no end, when we moved out, and I looked to be happy, and I was, as I said, for a while. But I don't know, somehow the change wore out like a prescription. So this move, remember that Len hatched the plan to make this move to the lakeside. This move was good for the speaker. It did do her good. It was of some benefit to her in her condition, but only for a while, right? It didn't last. It wore out like a prescription. The dosage wore out. And here we return to this bleakness that the poem has been representing to us, right? This hopelessness, this idea that there is no end to this condition. There is no hope of recovery, of getting better, of getting to a better place. And there's more to it than just window views and living by a lake. I'm past such help. Past this help of the landscape, and even perhaps past the help of rest, right? Yes, she's said, rest is what I want, but that too, it seems, might wear out like a prescription. Unless Len took the notion, which he won't, and I won't ask him, it's not sure enough. Here, again, there's some mystery here. What kind of drastic measure is the speaker talking about? In any case, it's not worth consideration because it's out of the question. I suppose I've got to go the road I'm going. Other folks have to, and why shouldn't I? She's resigned to her condition. I almost think if I could do like you, drop everything and live out on the ground. But it might be come night I shouldn't like it, or a long rain. I should soon get enough and be glad of a good roof overhead. So she thinks to herself, she's musing aloud, well, what if I were to live like you, you campers, and just be free-spirited and let things like feathers regulate my coming and going? But even that kind of life, carefree, no obligations, no duties, even that might wear out, right? Even that doesn't offer a permanent solution, the speaker says. I've lain awake thinking of you, I'll warrant, more than you have yourself some of these nights. The wonder was the tents weren't snatched away from over you as you lay in your beds. I haven't courage for a risk like that. Bless you, of course, you're keeping me from work. And here we might hear in this conversation the campers trying to sneak away, right? This has been a long discourse. The speaker has been going on and providing quite a lot of intimate detail about herself, her condition, her family's history. And these campers might be trying to very politely draw this conversation to a close and say, oh, we must be keeping you from work. Let's try to let you go. But the speaker, it seems, is very reluctant to let these campers go, to end this conversation. Right? She says, but the thing of it is, I need to be kept. There's work enough to do. There's always that. But behind, the worst that you can do is set me back a little more behind. And again, here's perhaps the most trenchant expression of that hopelessness that we hear in the speaker's voice. There's so much work to do, and it's just piling up. There's no hope of getting rid of the backlog. There's no hope of eliminating the debt. It's just accruing more and more. She's digging deeper and deeper into the hole, right? I shan't catch up in this world anyway. I'd rather you not go unless you must. And this is a rather bleak ending to a bleak poem. The speaker doesn't end with a hopeful note, doesn't end with a notion that perhaps things will turn out well, perhaps things will get better in the near or distant future. But I want to suggest that perhaps there is at least just a glint of light in the poem, in the speaker's appreciation, her gratitude to these campers who've been listening to her, for so long, who've been taking part in this conversation. She's reluctant to let them go because they've offered her this momentary solace. It's not a permanent solution, but she's spent this time with these campers, and she appreciates this time that she's spent with them. Right? She says, "I'd rather you not go unless you must." And that's perhaps why at the beginning of the poem she says, "I didn't make you know how glad I was." There is gladness in the poem. Not gladness because of this optimism that Len has, this can-do attitude, this belief that we'll get through it, in the end. The speaker holds no such hope. But she's glad for this moment and for these visitors because they represent a momentary stillness, a pause, a moment of respite in the storm before everything resumes, before everything goes back to the way it has been and will continue to be.